Welcome back everybody. Bryce Parks here, looking at setting up dimensions in this video. So I have a few things drawn here, this basic block or square and rectangle and circle. Threw on some dimensions. We're going to walk through in this video how to change the dimension styles. So I'm on my home tab here in regular 2D drafting. If I click on annotate, I'm going to see this tool ribbon right up here. Now we've already done a video on how to actually use the dimensions or dimension parts, and we've already talked about that. In this video we're going to be looking at how to set up dimensions to do different things by default. So I can click on this little drop down arrow right here, or access it the same way with clicking on the standard area and managing dimension styles. Either one will get me there. So I'm going to click on the down arrow, and notice that now I'm in the Dimension Style Manager. So in the Dimension Style Manager, I have a standard default dimension style. It generally defaults in AutoCAD. Everything is by layer or set up by default to where it'll take the properties of the layer that you put your dimensions on. It sets up to default to be decimal dimensions and 4-place decimals. If you want to change that, you can do that a few ways. So in this video, first way I'm going to do is I'm going to simply just modify the standard one, and then I'll show you how to create a new one and do different types of dimensions, like architectural dimensions, for example. So we have the standard one. I'm going to simply just come in here and I'm going to click on modify, and now I have a dialog box pop up that looks something like this right here. And so you'll see a bunch of tabs up here at the top. So lines, symbols and arrows, text, fit, primary units, alternate units, and tolerances. We are not going to talk about everything in here. We are going to talk about some of these. So if you want to dictate that every one of your dimensions have a certain color or line type, you can do that here. I do not recommend that. I generally recommend leaving it by block, and then it will assume the properties on the layer itself, as well as leaving the block generic so that you can change it from one layer to the next. So I generally will leave these for the colors as by blocks. I generally leave all of my numbering system as well by default. So baseline spacing 0.38. I don't change those manually. I'll show you if you're dealing with a very large part that you're dimensioning, or a very small part where your dimensions look really out of scale. I'll show you how to change that all at once here in just a minute. But in this section you can change your dimension lines, you can change your extension lines. On this page, or on this tab, we're not going to change anything. I click on symbols and arrows. You can also change how your dimensions come out. So for example, if you wanted architectural ticks, you could change it to architectural ticks. If you wanted some sort of dot at the end, you could do that. For my standard classes, we leave them as arrowheads. For architectural classes, we'll change them to architectural ticks. But the arrowheads here, once again, they'll have arrow sizes, center mark sizes, all that type of stuff you can change here on this tab. We're not going to change anything on this tab either. Come over here to text. You can change the text, so you can change it manually on your height. Once again, if you're doing a super large or super small drawing where you want everything to change, and by everything I mean the text height, the arrowhead size, the space of the extension lines, and the dimension lines, the gap off of your part, we're going to see that under the Fit tab. But if you needed to tweak that, you could change that here. If well, by default here we have text alignment at horizontal. If you wanted ISO standard, notice how it puts it all in alignment with the dimension. You can do aligned with dimension, and it puts in everything in alignment, like for example the radius. We're going to leave it all horizontal. Let's go over here to the fit. Now this is the this is the tab that if you want to change everything, all the scaling at once, we're going to change that right here. So use overall scale factor. It defaults to 1. If I were to change that, for example, to 0.5, notice what happens to my text. It gets half the size. The arrowheads are now half the size. The gap spacing off my part is half the size. The extension line past the arrowhead is half the size. All this is now half the size. If I were to change that to 5, let's say, it doesn't really scale it here, but that dimension text would be 5 times the size. So I'm going to change it back to 1. We're going to leave this the way it is for right now. We'll change that here in just a minute. I'm going to go in here to primary units. Now here, if you don't like decimal, if you want it to be architectural, for example, you can change it to architectural units where it's going to show in feet and inches. You can change it to fractional where it's going to default to fractional inches. You can change it to scientific where it has scientific notation. You can change all of those types of features in it. If we leave it at decimal, if you don't want it to read 4-place, let's say you want 2-place decimal, you can come in here and click on the bunch of zeros and drop it down to 2-place decimal, for example. By the way, if you change it to, let's say, architectural, you can also change the precision here. So if you want it to read in 1/16 of an inch, you can click on 1/16. If you want it to read in half-inch increments, you can click on 1/2 inch. Just keep in mind that it's rounding anytime you change the precision. So let me change this back to decimal and let's go 3 places. So now I have decimal 3 places, and you can even tell it how to round off even. This is sometimes one feature we change. The fit, of course, is something we change. Alternate units and tolerances we're not going to deal with here, but you can set it up. For example, if you wanted it to have basic tolerance format where it puts boxes around it, if you want it to be limits, meaning the upper and lower limits here of the part size, if you want it to be a deviation, so the plus minus factor there. But that's going to be beyond the scope of what we're doing for right now. So in this case, I just simply came in here, left my scale at 1 for this part, but I wanted to change it. Let's change it to 2-place now. So I'm going to change it to 2-place. I'm going to go OK, and I'm going to go close. And now notice all my dimensions changed from 4-place decimals now to 2-place decimals. All right, so that's how you set up some of the basic dimensions. So let's say that we have a part that is large. Okay, so in this case, our part's 25 and some change long. And notice that I dimensioned this part here. Basically, it was the previous part. I just scaled it up. But my dimensions are now not readable. So in this case, I'm going to create a new dimension style. So once again, I can click on this and go to Manage Dimension Styles, or I can click on this little down arrow right here, and I'm going to go in here. I'm going to click on the one I want to copy the previous settings of, and now I'm going to say, give me a new one. And so this one here, I'm going to call it. We'll just give it large part, kind of a generic name there, and I'm going to hit continue. And so now in here, let's say that for this large part, I want it to read in fractions, and I want it to actually scale correctly. So I'm going to go over here to fit, and I'm going to scale this up. Now, whenever I originally scaled it, it was about 10 times the size, so I'm going to go ahead and change that scale factor to 10. Sometimes this scale factor you need to just play around with to see what works as far as how you print it out. Sometimes if you print to scale or to certain scale factors, you would use that scale factor reference here. We'll look at that in just a minute with architecture. But I'm going to use a scale factor of 10, and now I'm going to change the primary units. Let's go to fractions, and let's say that I want 1/8 inch fractional units. So now the fit is 10 times the size of what it was previously, and the primary units are 1/8 inch fractions, and I go OK. So now I'm going to click on the large part, and I'm going to tell it set current. Okay, so if I click set current for that and I close, now when I do a dimension, so let's dimension, let's say for example this one here, notice what it did. The dimension itself has the same basic numbers. Okay, obviously this one was in decimal units rounded to 2-place decimals, and this here in fractional units, but it scaled up the arrowhead. It's scaled up how, I'm going to move this over straight horizontally just a little bit so you can see. So notice this extension line past the arrowhead, it scaled that up. The arrowhead size, it scaled that up. The text, it scaled that up. The gap off of your part from this little gap to this larger one. And so now if I want to change, let's say this original one, I could simply click on that, come up here to the top drop-down menu under the Annotate tab, and I could tell it take the properties of the large part. Okay, and so now it changes the properties. Just like we could do with layers, we can also do with dimension styles. So that is how you would change fractional units. That's how you could change your dimensions to be on this new dimension setting here. All right, so this other one here, I have scaled this last one up to be in architectural units. And the architectural units, if I were to measure it from corner to corner, I've scaled it up to like 100 feet. So now I'm going to set up another dimension style for architecture. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to simply go back to the standard and I'm going to say make me a new one. So it copies that over. I'm going to tell it architecture. And go continue. And so now I'm going to set these up. Now over here I'm going to leave the lines the same, but the symbols I want for architecture, I want to use the architectural tick for the tick marks. So I'm going to simply close change those. The text, if I want to change the type of font, so if I wanted, let's say, let's use Calibri. No, let's give it something a little bit different. Okay, so we'll do Courier New. You can see the font style is a little bit different there. So I'm going to apply that and close. So now I'm in Courier font. You don't have to do that, by the way. I'm just showing you how it changes the text too. The fit. So this fit factor here, let's say that I'm going to print this out at 1/8 of an inch equals a foot. If you zoom that in a viewport, you'll have to type in 1/96 XP. So I'm going to use a scale factor of 96 times the size. And that should get us, I believe, at the 1/8 of an inch equals a foot scale factor. I'm going to go primary units. Now I'm going to change this to architectural units. And precision, let's go to an 1/8 inch precision. And so I'm going to go OK. I'm going to click on architecture and set current and close. And now as I've set that current, if I were to click on endpoint to endpoint, notice what it did. So it gave me the architectural tick units. It gave me the dimension in feet and inches. It changed the font style from the Arial original font now to a Courier New type font. Let me erase this here. Let's say that I want to change these dimensions I've already put in. I can just simply click on these dimensions, go up here and go to architecture, and now it's put it all on architectural units. Okay, so that's a quick and easy way to change dimensions you've already set. Of course, once again, if you want a dimension, you're going to do a lot of dimensions, for example, in a particular style. If you just simply click on the one you want to do it in to set that current, now every time you run a dimension, notice it's on that style. Okay, so I generally, if I'm going to do a lot of dimensions, I will set this first. So if I want to set it to architecture, and now let's say that I want to run let's say a radius dimension for this one. Notice here, it now puts all my dimensions under the architecture style. So that's how you go about setting up your dimension styles right here, once again, on the Annotate tab.